President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau find common ground on tougher security for their shared border. Despite differing views on Syrian refugees, the two struck a conciliatory tone.
We have to create borders. We have to let people that can love our country in, and I want to do that, but we cannot let the wrong people in, and I will not allow that to happen during this administration.
The last thing Canadians expect is for me to come down and lecture another country on how they choose to govern themselves.
We'll take up the Trump-Trudeau summit with Ed Rollins and Michael Goodwin and a great deal more. Also tonight, President Trump promises to deal very strongly with North Korea after it launches a mid-range ballistic missile into the Sea of Japan. We'll take it all up with foreign policy experts Karen Skinner and John Hanna. And nearly 200,000 Californians evacuated below the Oroville Dam. Hundreds of thousands more threatened if the country's tallest dam fails. We'll have the latest from Oroville. Good evening, everybody. We're awaiting an important vote on Capitol Hill tonight. The Senate this hour expected to confirm former Wall Street banker Steve Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary. Mnuchin would be the 10th Trump cabinet nominee to be confirmed in more than 3 weeks now. We'll be updating you as soon as the vote happens. Also tonight, new developments concerning the Trump administration's legal challenge to reinstate the extreme vetting executive order. A hearing just ended in Seattle where federal district court judge James Robart says the lawsuit against Mr. Trump's executive order should proceed. Robart said he is, quote, not prepared to slow this down while the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals considers further appeals. This follows a request by the Trump administration in which they asked Judge Robart to put any proceedings at the district court level on hold. The Trump administration is considering what is called an en banc appeal at the Ninth Circuit Court. Mr. Trump addressed the vetting order during a news conference today with Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau.
It's really more than toughness. It's a stance of common sense, and we are going to pursue it vigorously. And we don't want to have our country have the kinds of problems that you're witnessing taking place, not only here, but all over the world. We won't stand for it. We won't put up with it. We're just not going to let it happen. We're going to give ourselves every bit of chance so that things go well for the United States, and they will go well.
The President and Prime Minister Trudeau also unveiled a bilateral initiative today. That initiative aimed at boosting women entrepreneurs. The White House said the roundtable addressed topics such as child care for working mothers, recruitment and retaining women in the workplace, and encouraging a higher level of female entrepreneurship. And National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn apologized to Vice President Mike Pence for telling him that sanctions were not discussed in a pre-inaugural phone call with the Russian ambassador. Fox News reporting that Flynn has no plans to resign nor to give up his security clearance. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer just released this statement saying the president is evaluating the situation, speaking to the vice president relative to the conversation the vice president had with General Flynn, and also speaking to various other people about what he considers the single most important subject there is, our national security. Well, here to discuss the future of the North Korean ICBM launch over the weekend into the Sea of Japan, General Flynn, his appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court over the ruling on the president's executive order, and Mr. Trump's meeting with Trudeau today. What will be the very busy veteran of 10 presidential campaigns and Republican strategist, Ed Rollins, and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Post, Michael Goodwin. Gentlemen, good to have you with us.
Nice to be with you.
Let's start with Flynn. This is being blown up largely by frankly, the left-wing media and, of course, the Democrats, and perhaps a few opportunistic Republicans in various places.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Well, look, it seems to be coming from different directions, these attacks on him. And I think that clearly there's some unhappiness in the White House as well somewhere. And I think if it is true that he actually lied to Pence that seems to me to be a fatal blow, I would think, if that is true. So I'm also curious, though, Lou, that this supposedly was an intercepted phone call between Flynn and the Russian ambassador. The transcript is apparently circulating. A lot of reporters have either seen it or been told what's in it. I would think this would be classified information. So I'm wondering who's got the dirtiest hands here. Nobody's hands seem to be particularly clean.
Ed? General Flynn has been with President Trump since day one. When everybody else in the national security community walked away from him, Flynn came in and helped him, advised him, and what have you. Unless it's a grievous sin, unless it's something like you say, that it was a deliberate lie, deliberately misleading the vice president, and the vice president will not back away, then I think you ought to try and save him. Mm-hmm. If you can't do that, I mean, the critical job that a national security has is to referee between the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. And we have the Secretary of State with no experience, so he could be a very valuable player at this point in time. So I think it's up to the president. Do I really need his value, his loyalty, his institutional understanding of the intelligence community? And if so, I'll keep him. If not, I'll try and find a replacement.
This is one that this is a bloodletting that what has become an increasingly venomous left-wing media and the left wing itself on Capitol Hill and in both houses. They desperately want, Michael. For that reason, the president has been aware of what his national security advisor is doing, may not have been aware of the conversation between the vice president and General Flynn. But the fact of the matter is, it's small potatoes compared to the victory it would handle the president's mortal enemies on the left and within his own party.
And that's got to be one of his considerations, is that even if Flynn is flawed, perhaps that handing those who are actually determined not just to wound the president, but to destroy his presidency. I mean, that's pretty clear, the New York Times, the Washington Post. So if you give them a scalp, it should be only because you personally, the president, feel it is time for Flynn to go, not because they want it or because it's drawing a lot of criticism. It's got to be very serious for the president to pull the plug on Flynn.
As we continue those thoughts, right now we are watching the Senate underway now with its voting to confirm to be the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, and we'll have that for you as soon as we approach the threshold of the majority vote required. We'll be going to the Senate to see what's going on. Let me say, I think that this business about Flynn, and you put it in some context when you think about the bloodthirsty wail that went up from the left-wing media and the Democratic Party when Kellyanne Conway made an offhand remark and people started talking about all sorts of nonsense. It's really time for this president, I believe, to slap down the Democratic Party and their really vile and venomous leaders and say, this is, we're just not going to take the time to deal with your sordid nonsense. Just go on if you must, but we're not going to play.
This is the 22nd day or 23rd day of administration, and this is your staff, and you need to let them get experience, get them, I mean, they're running 100 miles an hour right now, and basically my sense is any change, and if they get Flynn, they'll try and get somebody else. And it's not just the press. The press obviously are front and center. I also think there's intelligent community, some of the other people that are out there trying to get even with him for past sins.
The permanent government.
Permanent government. And I think it's very important.
To this point, I'd left out of the
but they're very important. They're very important. And I think to a certain extent, you got to beat it back. And especially if you decide.
Well, they're not half as damn important as they think they are. and they can be brought to heel. Obama, the report's out now, he is going to be within a couple of miles of the White House with a shadow government to make life hell for everyone in this administration and to thwart, in effect, the presidency of Donald J. Trump. That's bordering on sedition, is it not?
Well, yeah, it could be, but I think it's also going to overshadow the Democratic Party, and it is going to make it very difficult for them.
Now, this is starting to sound more interesting.
Well, but I mean, if you think about it, so who's the next leader of the Democratic Party? I mean, forget the DNC itself. I'm talking about who's the next candidate for president.
Keith Ellison.
Right, but it can't be Barack Obama, and it can't be Hillary Clinton, I suspect. And we know it can't be Obama, and it probably shouldn't be Clinton.
Yeah.
So therefore, I think that to the extent extent, they're like the big trees that won't let the little trees grow. They got to get out of the way so that other people can have a chance. And if Obama's going to continue to foment this, I think he's just going to retard the party's development.
If he couldn't do it with the real government when he was running it, and his party took tremendous hits at governor levels, congressional levels, he's certainly not going to do it as a shadow government 8 blocks away from the White House.
Yeah, when he had power, he wasn't particularly adroit in using it. Without it, my goodness, what can we...
When he's not on the ballot, it's disaster.
Well, it's a good point.
Just thought I'd make it.
And we were pleased and delighted that you did, Michael Goodwin. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Ed Rollins, thank you. We've never seen this, folks. I keep just shaking my head at various points. I hope you'll forgive me for that. Officials in Northern California tonight, they're engaged in a frantic fight to keep the nation's tallest dam from failing. 200,000 residents downstream from the Lake Oroville Dam have been ordered to evacuate. State engineers are looking at trying to figure out a way to repair the crippled emergency spillway. The dam itself is obviously under threat. Fox News correspondent Claudia Cohen is at the top of the dam in Oroville. She has the latest for us. Good evening, Claudia. Great to see you.
Good to see you too, Lou. I can tell you that the situation here is fluid. We have a mandatory evacuation order that remains in effect. That emergency spillway that you mentioned that was teetering on the brink of collapse yesterday is holding, and the water level here at the lake continues to drop. It's now about 6 feet below the rim. It's dropping about 4 inches every hour. The problem is it needs to drop a lot more and fast. Engineers are focusing on repairing Oroville Dam's emergency spillway, which suffered severe erosion damage over the weekend. Convoys of trucks delivered boulders that were used to fill dozens of super sacks. The plan is for Black Hawk helicopters to lower the sacks into the damaged areas and shore up what is essentially a huge ravine that had never been used before. This weekend, there was no choice. The reservoir is considered full at 901 feet. As of 11 a.m. Saturday morning, the water was 6 inches over that limit and started to pour over the emergency spillway. By 3 a.m. Sunday, the reservoir's surface crested at over 902 feet. 6 hours later, lake levels were dropping and are continuing to drop tonight.
Continuing to fall. That's also an important point. Our objective is to lower the lake level by 50 feet in order to prepare for future inflow of water.
More than 180,000 people were ordered to evacuate, sparking traffic jams and concern among residents.
Multiple accidents with injuries on the freeway coming over from Oroville. We were pulling a trailer and it took almost 2 hours.
Everyone's panicking. Everybody just got to remember that we're okay at the moment. Try to keep calm.
Evacuees and engineers are focused on the weather as more rain is in the forecast for later this week. And a live look at this massive airlift operation that just began here a few minutes ago. A couple of Black Hawk helicopters just ferrying these big sacks of boulders over to that emergency spillway to shore it up. But Lou, I can tell you this is going to be one of the biggest and most expensive repair jobs this area has ever seen. More than $200 million just to fix up the main spillway. And perhaps you can see some of the spray as the water comes crashing down against the broken concrete there. A lot of erosion damage on the main spillway, and of course it may need to be replaced entirely. So this is going to be very costly, and again we have these emergency evacuation orders still in effect until further notice. Back to you.
Claudia, could I ask you one question, and that is with the prospect of nightfall, will that interrupt the emergency repairs that are being undertaken?
You know, it's unclear. These emergency workers certainly use night vision goggles. That may come into play tonight. We're trying to get a little more information about exactly how long this operation will last. You can see they're picking up another one of these so-called super sacks filled with boulders that have been trucked in throughout the morning and last night from nearby quarries. And they're doing really quick work. They've already taken a few dozen of these sacks over to that emergency spillway. So this operation may not need to last into the evening and darker hours. But if they don't finish today, they're going to finish tomorrow. I can tell you that. They've been waiting here all day to get this operation started, and it started just about 15 minutes ago, and it's going pretty quick. We're going to keep an eye on it. We'll have more updates throughout the night. Lou?
Claudia, thank you very much. Claudia Cowan from Lake Oroville, California. And 200,000 people, as she reported, evacuated, and hundreds of thousands more obviously under threat. The good news is the lake's level is falling. Good news. Now the question is, will it be in time, and what does the weather hold in store for the region? The Senate right now is voting, as I said, on Steve Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary. We're monitoring that. When we get close, we'll be bringing it to you. We're coming right back. There is much more straight ahead. Stay with us. The Trump administration cracking down on criminal illegal immigrants across the country.
We're actually taking people that are criminals, very, very hardened criminals in some cases, with a tremendous track record of abuse and problems, and we're getting them out.
Immigrations and custom enforcement removing gang members and drug dealers throughout our communities. And the White House now says it has enormous evidence to support the president's assertion about voter fraud. We'll take all of that up with Michelle Malkin, my guest here next. We'll be right back. Much more straight ahead. Stay with us. For us to cover here, I want to start, if I may, with voter fraud and Stephen Miller. He just gave George Stephanopoulos fits over the weekend. It was hilarious to watch, unless you happen to be Stephanopoulos, or one of his producers. But this is remarkable that he is advancing the administration's case to have an investigation, and the left seems, Michelle, to say, well, why investigate it if there's no proof of it? As if there would never be a criminal investigation or any other kind of investigation, scientific even, because apparently we're supposed to have all the answers before we begin. That's the view of the left-wing media.
Yeah, that's right. And Stephen Miller is giving a lot of people fits, a lot of people seizures, because he is somebody who is brilliant and unapologetic and has been battle-tested in so many of these fights that the left has felt entitled to have no opposition to. And this has been the frustration of so many of us who have been on the side of immigration enforcement, or so many of these fights on cultural matters or matters of national sovereignty. And as young as Stephen Miller is, he is someone who has had more experience in opposing these forces and winning than so much of the open borders Republican establishment. So it's not just the George Stephanopoulos of the world. It's so many of these Republicans who've been in the pockets of big business and played along with this game, that we shouldn't look at voter fraud, that we shouldn't look at the impact on both economics and national security of systemic non-enforcement of our immigration laws.
I love it when Stephanopoulos was talking about the cost of the border wall, and Miller said, well, why don't you people ever investigate the cost of illegal immigration and the burden that it represents to the Treasury of local, state, and federal treasuries? And, and it's the essential question when it comes to economics. It's the essential question when we look at drug traffic across that border, which is the majority source for most of the most popular drugs in this country. And it makes you just wonder what it's going to take to bring rationality back to the left-wing media.
Well, it's more people like Stephen Miller in government and in positions of power and influence, and having platforms that ordinary Americans who've been harmed by all of these policies have never had. That is what is so refreshing, Lou, because patriots like Stephen Miller are ripping the kabuki mask over open borders theater, and in every aspect of it. I mean, Stephen Miller is somebody who had his finger on the pulse when he was working looking for Jeff Sessions and Michelle Bachmann and Dave Bratt on those H-1B workers who have never had a voice in Washington, or the family members of victims of illegal alien crime. And, you know, now we're seeing all of the hue and cry over these ICE raids. Why? Because finally, the 20,000 people who work in the Bureau of Immigration and Customs Enforcement have had their hands unleashed and untied to do their jobs. Of course, the left is up in arms about it.
And it's looking as though the companies that control left-wing media in this country are starting to see that there is a limit to the damage they can do to the Trump administration. And I think the American people are awakening the fact that the revolution that's being described by the Democrats in particular and the left is really a revolution of elites, whether they be in Hollywood or whether they be billionaires trying to drive a given message through the national media. So far, Donald Trump is making it clear he is remaining on the side of the American people. As you have been for a long time, Michelle, we appreciate it, and thanks for being with us.
You bet. Take care, Lou.
You too. Michelle Malkin. Be sure to vote in tonight's poll, and the question is, do you think President Trump should tell the left-wing activists attacking Kellyanne Conway and General Flynn that both issues are being handled confidentially and there'll be no longer any further discussion by the administration on the two incidents? Can you imagine the left-wing press just sputtering? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs, and I did not in any way mean to make my laugh editorial at all. Just ignore that. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs, like me on Facebook, and follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. Up next, President Trump making good on more of his campaign promises. Mr. Trump's efforts to make America safe again, and the left-wing national media's frantic attacks on the presidency. The subject of my commentary here next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Breaking news, the vote continues, but the Senate tonight has confirmed Steve Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary. The vote remains open, if there we are, as the votes are coming in, but he now has a majority of the votes in the Senate. The former Goldman Sachs employee who also helmed One West Bank, President Trump's choice of finance director during his presidential campaign, and he now becomes the financial advisor for the entire country. Mnuchin, just the 10th Trump cabinet nominee to be confirmed in what has now been more than 3 weeks. A few thoughts now on immigration and custom enforcement officials who are targeting known criminal illegal immigrants across the country. And much of the national left-wing media is simply apoplectic. Nearly 700 arrests made in raids conducted in at least 12 states. President Trump applauded the operation during a news conference today with Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau.
We're actually taking people that are criminals, very, very hardened criminals in some cases, with a tremendous track record of abuse and problems, and we're getting them out. And that's what I said I would do.
But the hyperventilation from the national left-wing media has been relentless.
A stern warning to all 11 million undocumented living in the United States, most of them law-abiding and paying taxes and working, that they're no longer safe to stay here.
Hundreds have been arrested this week in what federal officials say are routine operations targeting criminals.
An enforcement surge in undocumented immigrant arrests, targeted raids, rounding up hundreds of foreign nationals. Is the new administration behind the latest crackdown?
My goodness, not sensationalistic in any form, did you think? Let's look at some facts. In California, 150 of the 160 illegals arrested there had felony convictions. The rest had misdemeanors or were in the United States illegally. Criminal histories ranging from child sex crimes to weapons charges to assaults. A Salvadoran national, part of the MS-13 gang, also apprehended. ICE also pointing out these raids were planned before President Trump took office. And critics forget the fact that liberal stalwarts such as then Senator Barack Obama and former President Bill Clinton both praised tougher border security and immigration enforcement before, well, losing their way. And both still hold true. White House senior policy advisor Stephen Miller responded to the constant wailing and clucking from the left-wing critics.
There's been a lot of coverage in the news about the effects of these enforcement actions on people who are here illegally. That's an issue people are free to discuss. But what's more important and what should be discussed more is the lives that are being saved, Chuck, the American lives that are being saved because we're taking enforcement action. We're going to focus on public safety and saving American lives, and we will not apologize for that.
President Trump campaigned and won in November, stressing that immigration security is national security. The left-wing Dems and national media will continue to put their ideology ahead of national security. Fortunately, our commander-in-chief is committed to putting America first and securing our national interest with his commitment to law and order. We're coming right back. Stay with us. Joining us tonight, Dr. Karen Skinner, Director of the Institute for Politics and Strategy at Carnegie Mellon University, and John Hannes, Senior Counselor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome to you both. And Dr. Skinner, let me begin with you. A closed-door session of the Security Council, condemnation of the launch by North Korea, and Ambassador Haley calling for action on the part of the United Nations, accountable, and not just in words, but in action. What do you make of it, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I think Ambassador Haley's words were correct, but actually, as you know, Lou, and you've talked about it so many times, we have to rely on the United States for leadership in dealing with North Korea and most of the challenges around the world, because the United Nations cannot be counted on. And what I'd like to say is that I think the Trump administration has been very deliberate in the past few days, thinking about and speaking about North Korea. There was a much stronger statement from Abe than Trump initially during their visit, but Trump has come out, President Trump, very strong and saying that this is a serious and grave challenge, and there are many options open to the U.S., military, economic, and political, and all of those are now being discussed coming out of the White House.
John Hanna, your thoughts?
No, I agree with the professor, Lou. This is a good start, I think, in the United Nations, but the question is, are there going to be actions? Are there going to be comprehensive sanctions imposed on North Korea? And most importantly, are the Chinese finally going to enforce them? Is President Trump, unlike President Obama, going to be able to pressure and squeeze the Chinese or persuade them to really bring the hammer down on the North? That's the only way I think we're going to be able to bring sufficient economic pressure on this regime to get it to begin to back off from this nuclear and missile program that at some point in the very near future is going to pose a direct threat to the continental United States.
Have we moved toward that line, Dr. Skinner, in which all options have to be on the table to prevent North Korea from adding to the range of their ICBMs, because at that point their threat radius extends to the continental United States?
I think we're there right now, and that's why I think you see a very kind of deliberate and pragmatic approach being put forth by the Trump administration. I think they understand that this is a major test by North Korea, its first geopolitical test in office in less than a month's time, while it's already dealt with Iran's ballistic missile tests, and it's continuing the fight in Iraq and Syria. So I think now with North Korea, we've got to look at all options, and one of the main ones comes out of a U.S. law from last year, which allows the U.S. to impose sanctions on Chinese companies that take part in the North Korean arms market. It may be time to act on that very issue right now.
Are we moving to a position, do you think, here, John, where President Trump is making it clear enough, standing shoulder to shoulder with Prime Minister Abe, his conversations upcoming with Netanyahu, his telephone conversations with more than 50 leaders, the world leaders at least, are getting a pretty good sense of what he is thinking. Is there a way forward here that does not involve military action, either on the part of the United Nations? One can't imagine China falling in line with such a thing, because economic sanctions have not worked against Iran, they have not worked against Russia.
Well, there may be a non-military means of solving this problem in North Korea, Lou, but it will not work. We will not get that non-military means unless there really is a stick on the table and a credible threat that if all else fails, the United States is not going to allow North Korea to threaten us with nuclear-armed ICBMs that can take out not only San Francisco and Los Angeles, but New York and Washington, D.C., too. That is an intolerable threat, and hopefully the United States can rally the world to do something about it. But unless there's a credible threat of American military force together with our key allies in Asia, I don't think that's going to happen.
You know, we have lurking behind all of this, of course, rising tensions with Moscow, rising tensions with Tehran. China is an absolute wild card at this point because there have been conflicting signals from Beijing. This is going to be a tough call for this administration, and a great deal, perhaps, is riding on the next steps of this administration. What do you think, Doctor?
I actually think that the administration has started what you're just talking about. They've looked at the exact same international landscape that you've just described and dispatched General Mattis, our new Secretary of Defense, to the Asian region for the reasons that you've talked about, to reassure the South Koreans and the Japanese, to send a signal to the North Koreans and the Chinese that we mean business, that we do have some military options that don't include the use of force, but for example, the THAAD missile defense system, speeding that up for the defense of the South Koreans. We've already let the Japanese know that we're defending them in the East China Sea, their right to the territory. So I think we've done some military type maneuvers already.
Doctor, thanks so much. John Hanna, I'm sorry we're out of time. I promise to begin with you next discussion.
You got a deal.
Will you forgive me
Lou.
for that? Thanks so much. John Hanna, thank you. Dr. Skinner, thank you. Now the quotation of the evening, this one from former HPCO and candidate for the GOP Republican presidential nomination, Carly Fiorina. She said this: "People are angry that a common sense thing like securing the border or ending sanctuary cities is somehow considered extreme. It's not extreme, it's common sense. We need to secure the border." Well, joining me now, a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committees, Congressman Chris Collins, and again, it bears repeating, the first congressman to endorse Donald J. Trump to become president of the United States. Great to have you with us, Congressman.
Always good to be with you, Lou.
Let's start with first, if I may, instead of the executive order that's going to wind its way through, I think we would both agree, as it is, the president's going to have his say. Do you agree?
Oh, ultimately, there's no question, and I like what I'm hearing, to issue a new executive order that addresses the nonsense the judge in Seattle put forward on green cards and the like, that was clarified but not to their satisfaction. So now that we know what their game plan is, we can face it directly, put out the new executive order, call it a win, and move on.
Yeah, and I like the view that, you know, this president has the power and the inclination to enforce all laws, and nearly all of these laws are on the books. So, you know, there it is. James Webb, the former senator, Democrat, saying that there is a campaign, as he put it, quote, on the Hill in media and academia to personally discredit not only President Trump but the people around him. Which I think most of us believe anyway, but to hear Webb say it tells you how the threat level is rising. Your reaction to the statement?
Yeah, well, I mean, desperate people will do desperate things, and whether it's Nancy Pelosi, Senator Schumer, Senator Sanders, or Warren, they are desperate. They're trying to put together the playbook to discredit, delegitimize President Trump, and so they're going to do what they can to throw a wrench into what I look at as a smooth-running machine. We now have Secretary Price. Tonight we have Secretary Mnuchin. Right. So whether it's health care or Treasury, we've got the two secretaries finally in place. We can move those forward on our agenda. And the rest of it, Lou, is just noise in the wind.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I want to let everybody know that David Shulkin is now the Secretary of the Department Department of Veterans Affairs. 2 confirmations tonight out of the U.S. Senate, the 11th for President Trump, the 11th nominee to be confirmed. So progress is underway before our very eyes, Congressman. Also before our very eyes is Barack Obama, whom many claim will be creating a shadow government to frustrate the policy goals of this administration. We're looking at something that's coming very close, it seems to me, to sedition. When you start working against the interest of the United States government, whether it's in the person of Donald Trump or whomever, and conspiring and organizing to frustrate the policies that he intends to execute, I think that really takes us to a whole nother level. What do you think?
I agree, and it started with the playbook when the Democrats just had their retreat. They called it their retreat, as to how they're going to disrupt the government of the United States and make sure that Donald J. Trump, president, doesn't get anything done. I think, Lou, what they're doing is they're playing with dynamite here, and they're just begging us to get rid of the filibuster, not only on the Supreme Court, but frankly, get rid of the filibuster on legislation. That's something I would support, and if we do that, they become totally irrelevant. Let Senator Schumer and the others do anything they can. Absent the filibuster, they become irrelevant. We move this country forward faster than anyone ever would think possible. We achieve success for the American public, and the Democrats will be wandering lost in the desert for a very long time.
Well, and with that, the country being restored again to safety, security, to prosperity, and great again, I think, is the expression we're looking for here. Congressman, great to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Always good to be with you, Lou.
Congressman Chris Collins. Joining us tonight, founder, chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Ralph Reed. Ralph, great to have you with us. I want to start with this ad, 100 evangelical leaders going after President Trump. What in the world is that about?
Yeah, you know, I read that open letter, Lou, and it was kind of interesting because they said that we should balance compassion with security. They acknowledged that the president has every right as the commander-in-chief to protect and secure our borders and the homeland. And so I'm not really clear, based on the principles they laid out of the Christian faith, of which I'm a strong adherent,
right.
How in the world a temporary pause in order to make sure we have the right criteria for terrorists who might be trying to enter our country is in any way violating the principles of our country, much less our Christian faith.
Yeah, it gets a little tough when you start trying to balance American lives in some abstract way, when in fact we want our security to be absolute. Let me turn, if I may, to this campaign against Betsy DeVos, our new Secretary of Education. She seems to be an extraordinary person. She's being blocked by Black Lives Matter, police and her security not doing much. You know, and it's peculiar that there is such an attack against her. Why is that, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's really very simple, because she represents a direct and existential threat, as they see it, to the stranglehold that the teachers' unions, bosses, have had on our public education system. I might add, Lou, to the detriment of millions of school children who are trapped in schools where they cannot learn and where they are not safe, and where drug deals go on as a daily occurrence, or shootings or other violence in the hallways. And I've been a friend of Betsy DeVos's for over 20 years. She's a woman of great integrity, a great leader in Michigan and nationwide on education reform. And I think the attacks on her, the vicious personal attacks, and by the way, Lou, the attacks on her religious faith, claiming that she was seeking to impose her religion on other people, are just over the line. They have no place in our civic discourse.
And Ralph, it's always good to talk with you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'd like to, if I could, talk you into coming back with us, if your schedule permits, sometime later this week, and we can continue the conversation. I appreciate it. Ralph Reed, thank you. That's it for us tonight. We thank you for being with us. Joining us tomorrow night, Ambassador John Bolton, Charlie Hurt, Gail Trotter. Please be with us then. Thanks for being with us tonight. Good night from New York.